Good afternoon. My name is John Loper. I'm the Managing Director for Professional Practice at CFP Board, and I'm going to be covering a webinar on reporting your self-employed, pro bono, and volunteer experience. We get a lot of questions about this. And joining me today are two of my colleagues, Amanda Zapata and Courtney Thompson. They're going to be helping me answer your questions at the end of this webinar. So just a quick refresher, the experience requirement to become CFP certified, or the required to earn CFP certification, is you can meet our experience requirement one of two ways. The first way, and this is quite frankly how the majority of candidates earn the experience, is through the standard pathway. That's 6,000 hours of professional experience related to the financial planning process. Or, and we've covered this in a previous webinar, you can actually meet our experience requirement through the apprenticeship pathway, and that's 4,000 hours of apprenticeship experience that meets additional requirements. We're not going to go through those specifics today, but one of those requirements is that the individual immediate supervisor is a CFP professional, which narrows down the number of candidates who qualify for the apprenticeship pathway. But in any event, these are the two ways to earn experience towards CFP certification. So this webinar covers self-employed, pro bono, or volunteer experience. So we get a lot of questions about this. What if I'm self-employed? I have a 1099, I'm paid by 1099. I do pro bono. So I'm involved with providing pro bono, or I'm a volunteer. And the short answer to this is we at CFP Board are not interested in whether or not you're paid. We're not as concerned about whether you're self-employed or whether you're a W-2 employee or whether you're a volunteer. It's the same financial planning process requirements as any of the other positions you may enter. But the big difference here is, do you have a supervisor or do you work for yourself? Because if you work for yourself, as this third bullet says, you will need a qualified attester, which takes us to the next slide. What is a qualified attester? So since you work for yourself, we need somebody who's very familiar with the work you do to attest to the work that you do. And it could be any of these individuals: a certified financial planner, a chartered financial consultant, a chartered life underwriter, a chartered financial analyst, someone who has a PhD in business or economics, a licensed attorney you may work with, or a CPA, a licensed CPA. And what we're looking for here is someone with whom you work that can attest to the work that you do. Just another voice that says, yes, this individual does do the experience that he or she has submitted to CFP Board. We review self-employed, pro bono, and volunteer experience. In a minute, we're going to be looking at the actual experience tool and how to submit it, but you're going to enter your experience in your account and answer the following questions. Number one, how do you engage with clients? And we'll show that in a second. Which steps of the financial planning process do you use? And then you want to check off that the job is either self-employed, pro bono, or volunteer. And finally, what is your qualified attester's credential that we showed in the previous slide, and his or her contact information. So let's go to the tool then on the next page. How do you engage with clients? So under this section, I primarily engage with clients. So you're actually face-to-face, either in a primary or supportive role. I primarily support the financial planner and/or the financial planning process. So this could mean that you're doing tasks behind the scenes that the financial planner uses with the client. You could supervise financial planners. So you may not actually be involved in the meeting, but you're supervising others. There's also internships through the financial planning FPA program. They have an experience internship. So if you want to input that, this is where you would check that off. And then finally, if you teach college level courses in financial planning concepts, you may be able to get experience that way. So this is the actual type of experience and how you engage with clients. That's step one. Step two, what are the job details and the steps of the process used? On the left, you want to type in your company's name, that's required. The start date, so when did you start there? When should we start calculating that experience? End date, you would leave that blank if you're still earning experience, or if it's a complete entry, obviously you would put the end date, and then the position, what is your title? And then under the primary elements of the personal financial planning process, for this one, you want to select all that apply. So if you're only involved in formulating financial planning recommendations, you would check off developing financial planning recommendations. If you're involved in developing and presenting the recommendations, you would check both of those. If you're involved in all 7 steps of the financial planning process, then you would check off all 7. There's a box there that lists the number of hours per week. We get this question a lot. I work 60 hours a week. We give a maximum of 40 hours a week credit. So the maximum you can put there is 40. If you're part-time, obviously put in the hours below the 40. And then we've highlighted the check box at the bottom of this page. This position was self-employed, pro bono, or volunteer. By checking that box, it's going to require that you put in the attester that we've talked about previously. And here's that page, the attester's name, the attester's email, and then the type. And that's going to be a drag down menu that looks to the qualified attesters that we mentioned previously. We get the question too, am I allowed to reach out to the attester? Well, of course you're allowed to reach out to them and also give them a heads up that you've submitted this information to us and that they need to be on the lookout for an email from us, because your experience will not be approved, assuming it meets the definition for approval, until we get a response from the attester. All self-employed, pro bono, or volunteered submissions, as we've already said, need a qualified attester and will be sent for verification once you've entered the position in the experience tool. What are some frequently asked questions? What if I'm technically considered self-employed or complete pro bono or volunteer work, but I have a supervisor? If you have a supervisor, you don't need a qualified attester. So once again, whether you're a 1099 or a W-2, we're not as concerned about that. If you have a supervisor, we want to hear from that person, not a qualified attester. What happens if I don't know a qualified attester? We have thousands of individuals submit experience every year. There have been very, very few examples that I'm even aware of where someone doesn't know someone that meets the requirements listed on the previous page. And what the qualified attester is asked to do is to just verify that what you submitted is accurate to the best of their knowledge. That's all they're asked to do. It's just another layer of a quality check for the experience submissions. And then finally, what are your resources? If you have more specific questions that we haven't covered here today, please reach out to experience@cfpboard.org. That's really going to be your best source for more information. Once again, the email is experience@cfpboard.org. Or if you want to review our website, please go to cfp.net/experience. Or, as I referenced earlier, there's standard and apprenticeship pathways. You can go to cfp.net/pathways. With that, I'd like to open it up for your questions. There's a Q&A box here. If anybody has any urgent or immediate questions, Amanda, Courtney, and I will do our best to answer it right now. So Amanda, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, we do have a number of questions, John. Would we accept a CPA who is related as a qualified attester, whether that be a brother, uncle, sister, aunt, but somebody who is related, can they be a qualified attester?
Sure. If they want to attest to the work that you do and they're a CPA and they know what you do, yeah, the fact that they're related, we won't hold that against you.
And clarification on the 40 hours per week. If you are working full-time and do volunteer work, can you get more than 40 hours per week credited?
So that's an interesting question. I think that we'd have to review that individually because there's those might be separate entries. So it's 40 hours per week per role. I don't know if you want to have a clarification there, but let's have that individual follow up specifically on that question.
Yeah, and you can't overlap in the same time period. So if it's overlapping in the same time period, the most that our system will accept is 40 hours per week. So if you're saying, for example, this week you've done 40 hours of your full-time job, and then you also did 20 hours of volunteer work, the most that you can report in that one time period is 40 hours per week.
Okay, yeah, if it's within the same week, then it's a maximum of 40.
Yep. Next question for you, John. I believe I read that if you are a VITA tax certified at the advanced level, you can get credits toward CFP board experience hours. How is that verified as the class is online? You have a certificate at the end, but there is no attester.
And I know in the past we've had individuals from VITA do that on their behalf.
Perfect.
And I would imagine there are CPAs there.
Perfect. Last call, on a previous webinar, we mentioned that if we have passed the CFP exam, you can self-attest. Is that correct? I passed the exam and will be starting my own business. So I guess the question really, John, is can an individual self-attest to their own experience if they hold one of the qualified attester credentials?
If they hold one, so in dire circumstances, we have allowed that. If they have one of those, we would prefer, our first choice is to have someone else. It's not an option. We can consider that if they're one of those designations.
And I would just add on to that, where if you are in a situation where you do have another qualified credential and you can't find anybody else, reach out to the experience team, reach out to Courtney, experience@cfpboard.org, and Courtney and John can definitely discuss those one-off situations with you. John, next question here is, can you have multiple attesters?
Yes. So if you have multiple, and I'm assuming this means you have multiple entries that require different attesters, the answer to that would be yes.
Great. Next question.
And one more clarification there. Multiple attesters are not needed for, single entries. So I'm assuming that's for multiple.
Perfect. Yeah, and the reporting form, like we saw a couple of screens ago, only allows you to enter one individual per role. So I would say if you absolutely need us to know about another attester, maybe we can't get in touch for verification purposes with that first attester, we can definitely reach out to other individuals in those cases. Next question for you, John. If it's volunteer work and I have a supervisor, can that person attest if they don't meet the qualified attester criteria?
Well, like we said earlier, if it's volunteer work with a supervisor, you wouldn't need the attester. You would just need that person.
So you just wouldn't check off that volunteer box on the bottom of the second screen when you're reporting your experience, and it would just on the third screen where it's asking you for verification, you would just enter normal supervisor information.
Yeah, and if I wasn't clear on that, if you have a supervisor and you are in one of these types of roles, don't check that box so that you can put the supervisor's name in.
Great. Next question here is how can we submit hours for a given year in piecemeal fashion? For example, someone worked 2 qualifying part-time jobs. They have their morning experience hours. Can they submit their morning experience hours and then go back and submit afternoon hours for those same days later on? How does entering multiple roles in one time period to get to the 40 hours per week work?
Yep. So we would encourage you to submit. I would think the cleanest thing to do would be to submit your morning and afternoon as close to the same time as possible. But as Amanda stated previously, you're only going to get 40 hours max per week. So if you do the morning hours now and in a few weeks you do the afternoon hours, that's fine. But understand that the maximum you'll get per week is 40 hours.
And so you'd probably want to enter them as separate positions, just to keep track of that, especially if they are 2 completely different roles. But you can enter as many entries as you need. You can enter as many entries as you need in one time period to get to that 40 hours per week. So if they are different roles, morning and afternoon hours, or however you end up qualifying that, it doesn't have to be morning and afternoon, but maybe Monday through Wednesday you work one role, and Thursday through Friday work a different role. You can submit those as different entries in that same time period for sure. John, next question here is, does it matter if your attester is located in a different state than you?
Nope. That's the short answer. It doesn't. If they're willing to attest and they know your work, it does not matter.
Great. This is a good question here, John. Is it possible to fulfill the apprenticeship pathway as a self-employed person if I have a supervisor?
Great question. That's bringing in a couple of the concepts. So if you meet the apprenticeship pathway and a CFP and are self-employed, so you're 1099, but you have a CFP who is willing to attest, or the individual is a supervisor. So actually this individual can fill it out one of 2 ways. You could say that you're self-employed and have your CFP supervisor attest, or you could not click that and have your CFP supervisor attest based on the apprenticeship pathway. And if that's not making sense to you, send that question to experience@cfpboard.org. But the short answer is you can actually meet it one of 2 ways.
Great. Yeah, having a CFP professional is, like you mentioned, John, right? Kind of the sweet spot. You could go one of 2 ways for that type of position. Next question for you, John. I am self-employed and work by the project. So there are weeks where I work 35 hours against the standard and weeks where I have none. How do I best report that?
So my suggestion to you, the cleanest way to do that would be multiple entries. So depending on how, so if by project you mean you work 35 hours a week per project, then I would list entries by project. If by project you mean one week it's 35, another week it's 10, then you're going to need to put in many entries to make sure that you're putting in the right hours.
Great, thank you. Next question here is, what if I work part-time and I'm earning hours under a supervisor, but I'm also self-employed the other part-time? Can I use my supervisor for both pieces if he is not a qualified attester?
Sure, I understand this question. I work part-time, earning hours under a supervisor. Okay, so that would just be a part-time entry, but also self-employed the other part-time.
So I think it's 2 different roles. So it's like one role, maybe you work with, bank A, or, some just maybe like a traditional type firm role. And then the second role is maybe your own business where you're self-employed.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, the self-employed, you can use your supervisor for the self-employed piece if he or she is your supervisor. So the first piece, I'm working part-time and earning hours under a supervisor, that's absolutely yes. But I'm also self-employed for the other part-time. If the supervisor is also the supervisor for the self-employed, then the answer is yes. If the answer to that question is no, then the other self-employed part-time would require an attester.
Perfect. I would just say if you continue to have any questions, let us know. Feel free to type it in here, or we can definitely schedule some time to talk through exactly how to enter that or what that means if you send an email to experience@cfpboard.org. John, question here. For folks that currently offer financial coaching one-on-one or via a group setting with clients, does this preparation for those meetings count towards the experience requirement or only the client-facing work?
So my first answer is write that up and submit it so that we can review this more formally. It sounds like volunteer work with clients, which could meet the experience.
It may even fit under indirect support,
yeah,
where you have the ability, there's going to be a box for you to free type exactly what you do.
So
that
for the person who answered that question, it sounds good. My suggestion to you would be to submit it so that we can review it.
Another question here: for pro bono work done on your own, can a CFP CPA attest even if you are not working with or for that CFP or CPA?
Yes, and that's the definition of the attester.
Perfect. Next question here. Working for a financial advisor who is not a CFP professional is not a problem since they are employing me, correct? And are my supervisor. So let me reword that. So if I work for a financial advisor who is not a CFP professional, is that a problem just when reporting experience?
No.
Yeah, so the only time that you're required to have a CFP professional is if you're reporting experience under the apprenticeship pathway, or if your experience is self-employed and you don't have any supervisor, right, then you would need somebody with one of those qualified credentials, which includes being a CFP professional. But otherwise, if it's just traditional experience that would submit under the standard pathway, there's no credential for the supervisor requirement. If you work part-time for a financial planning firm, would the CFP board allow for you to switch to the apprenticeship model with fewer experience hours?
If you work part-time for a planning firm with fewer experience hours. So I'm not sure what this question means. If the experience qualifies for the apprenticeship model, then you would check those boxes and then it would apply. You don't switch from standard to apprenticeship. It either meets the definition or it doesn't. But what we see is that individuals who don't have enough apprenticeship hours, those hours also count toward the standard pathway. And I don't know if you're understanding this question differently than I am, Amanda.
No, I think that you answered it. I would just, confirm or just reiterate what you said, John, is just, if you are working part-time and you've entered those hours and, you didn't meet the apprenticeship requirements, maybe you weren't directly working with clients right away, or you weren't working in all 7 steps of the process for the first year, right? Then for the second year, you start meeting all the requirements for apprenticeship pathway, just enter that as a separate entry. And the way that our system tracks that is based off of how you are answering the questions in the form. So if it says, okay, you've done everything to meet the apprenticeship requirements, then you'll see those hours start tracking towards apprenticeship for that specific role. First role that didn't have the apprenticeship qualifications would only count towards the standard pathway. So the answer is yes, you can input as many entries as you want, and depending on what you're doing, our system will track towards that 6,000 hours or towards that 4,000 hours, and whichever one you meet first is how you'll complete the experience requirement. For people who spend time on indirect support related to financial blogging or journalism and are self-employed, how should these types of hours be tracked and quantified?
The same. So the fact that you're blogging slash involved with journalism and are self-employed, it would be tracked the same.
Yeah, so there you wouldn't track exactly. You wouldn't need to report hours differently. You still just look at the qualifications and, you know, just say, what hours of a 40-hour week count towards this? And that's what you'd report.
Yeah, if those hours are self-employed, they should be checked as such, and then verified by a qualified tester.
Perfect. Next question here is just to reiterate and reconfirm, if I work as a volunteer, aka don't get paid, but have a supervisor and they don't meet the attester qualifications, I can still have them certify my experience. Is that correct?
So I work as a volunteer with a supervisor, right? Then don't check that it's a volunteer so that you can input a supervisor.
So yeah, exactly. So what our form is looking for is self-employed, volunteer, or pro bono in the very, very traditional sense where you're doing it completely on your own. You don't have a supervisor that is, you know, helping you in that work or supervising you in that work. So if you do have a supervisor, again, like John mentioned previously, it doesn't matter payment or non-payment or how you do business. Really, it's more about, right, like, do you have that supervisory relationship in the work that you're doing? Yes. Okay, you don't need to check the box. If you are completely independent and on your own, then do check the box and you need that qualified attester. Next question for you, John. I am a career changer who passed the exam in July. I have minimum experience. I am considering continuing my education and pursuing a master's in personal financial planning before starting my career. My concern is that I will not be able to complete the 6,000 hours in the next 5 years. Can this time period to earn the required experience be extended?
Would say to that individual is we have a policy exception process. So if you go to cfp.net, go to our search bar, type in policy exception. As you get close to the end of that 5 years and you would like to request more time, you'd have to submit the specifics of why you want more time and why it took you as long as it's taken you not to get those hours. And then we will review that.
Great. Question, can you, and I think we answered this already, but just asking again, John, can you go the apprenticeship pathway if you change companies or supervisors?
So whether you change companies or supervisors, well, actually the supervisor does play into this. It's the role itself. It's not whether you work for a certain company or a certain supervisor, although the definition of apprenticeship pathway requires that your supervisor be a CFP professional. So if you change companies and you have a new supervisor who's a CFP professional and you now fit the apprenticeship pathway, then the answer to that is absolutely yes.
Great. Next question, how often should we report hours? How often will you contact the attester to verify each time you enter experience?
So the answer to that question depends on the entry. So if you have an entry that you're working 40 hours a week indefinitely, we're only going to contact the qualified attester for that entry. But every entry that requires a qualified attester, correct me if I'm wrong on this, the system will send them an email. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So every indirect support, self-employed, pro bono, or volunteer entry does require verification. Yep. So I guess to answer your question is we recommend reporting, often in your account, right? Just so that way you can be able to track your experience yourself and how far along you are to that 6,000 hours. But, once you do enter, especially related to this webinar for self-employed experience, and you input your qualified attester, we're going to send that verification request. And if you need to update that experience, you can work with our experience team just to update and kind of refresh those hours, or add a new complete entry based off of the last end point that you had entered. So that way we can keep accruing those hours for you. But we can definitely help you out when and if you get to that point. John, another question. I know you can't answer whether any specific experience can be approved, but in general, has creating an internal planning strategies handbook supporting advisors to develop financial planning recommendations been looked upon favorably?
So, yeah, without seeing the details of this, if the work that you do supports advisors and the end user as a personal financial planning client, those activities are generally looked upon favorably.
Awesome, thank you. How recent does the experience have to be? How many years can we go back if needed to add up to 6,000 hours?
We go back 10 years for your experience, and we go from the time you pass the exam, as that individual asked previously, we go out 5 years from the time you took the exam.
Great. Next question here is, can you get hours for blogging? What if I publish my own blog?
Yeah, so journalism and writing one can qualify. Once again, we'd have to review that. And yes, individuals who publish their own blog have been approved.
Great. What if we have a couple questions around family members. What if you are doing work for family members and you're self-employed, or maybe you're doing it on pro bono basis? How can you report that, or how does that work and favor or factor into experience for CFP board certification?
If I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, so does financial planning services for relatives count? I guess is the easiest way to ask that.
So the most recent definition for client is that the individuals can't be family members.
Great. And that's in any relation to any experience that you're doing, John, or is it, how do you, we have a question like, what if family members are part of a larger group that you're teaching?
Yeah, and actually Courtney just sent to panelists the FINRA rule. Clients may not be immediate family members. So providing personal financial planning to clients, we exclude any experience related to family members.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
How far do we go back in the past to report experience? We already answered that. That's 10 years.
Yep. I'm not sure I completely understand this question, but I think it's related to kind of having experience that could count towards both the standard and apprenticeship pathway. And do any hours get reduced if you have standard experience hours, John, but then also, another role maybe have hours that count towards the apprenticeship pathway? We don't do any sort of reductions.
No, there's no reduction. You either have a total of 4,000 apprenticeship hours or a total of 6,000 standard pathway hours. They don't subtract from one another. Although, as I said previously, your apprenticeship pathway hours, if you don't have 4,000, can count toward the 6,000 total.
Great, thank you. This question is more about, just completing the experience requirement, but I'm a college professor and only 4,000 hours can be counted towards experience for my teaching experience. Do you have any suggestions on accumulating the remaining 2,000 hours, or where to look maybe for some suggestions?
That's a good question.
While you think about it, I have a couple of suggestions that I've come across
Yeah.
in some areas. One is the CFP Board Career Center. There are internships on the Career Center I would take a look at. There are also, some entry-level positions in financial planning or even just higher level positions as well. But, the CFP Board Career Center is a great place to start looking. And then the CFP Board Candidate Forum, the online community, if you're not already engaged in that community, you could always post a question, how are people gaining experience? That's a great way to just get feedback from your peers. Like John mentioned earlier, the FPA, the Financial Planning Association, has their externship program where you can, it's not 2,000 hours, but you can get some hours for completing that financial planning externship. And then there's a lot of great networking opportunities in the various membership organizations like FPA, like NAPFA, like XYPN. So I would also just encourage you to check out just those types of resources or and see what other people are doing or make connections to, try to find that last year of experience.
No,
Anything else, John? Any other?
No, I think that's a great suggestion.
Perfect. And then just to clarify, so based on what I've heard, teaching a class with a group size of 50 in which 4 of the attendees are family members will not count as experience. Does that sound correct, John?
So once again, we'd like for you to submit that so that we can review it formally. That's the trouble doing this as a webinar. We want to give you guidance here. If you're teaching a class where individuals in the class are not family members, then it may count. But what we've had people submit in the past is providing financial guidance or counseling to family members exclusively to count toward experience. Are you reading that the same way that I am, Amanda?
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So I would just say, some of this is case by case depending on exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, but if the majority are not family members, it may qualify. So we are out of questions. I want to thank everybody. Those were really, really good. Some of them very detailed questions. Once again, let me show you that email address. You'll get good answers there at experience@cfpboard.org. If your question is, will this be accepted? Don't send that to experience@cfpboard.org. Go into your experience tool, let us review it and conditionally approve it, deny it, or ask for more information. And once again, those websites, cfp.net/experience and cfp.net/pathways. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Courtney, for your help today. And thanks everybody for joining. We look forward to you joining us at a future CFP Board webinar. Have a great day.